What is up, folks? Casual Dad here with another Warhammer Combat Cards video. It's been a minute. It's been a busy summer, a busy couple weeks with some travel and a new job, which has been great, but I'm looking to get back into the swing of things. And I had an actual request, which was pretty cool. So I'm going to go ahead and do some quick deck building tips, and the focus of the day is going to be our buddy, Commissar Yarrick. And I'm going to do two of these. They'll be sort of back to back, so we'll start with Yarrick. Coming in at 16 points, Yarrick is the cheapest Servants of the Emperor Warlord, and I believe up there for the cheapest Warlord in the entire game. Let's check that real quick. Yeah, he actually is the cheapest Warlord in the entire game by 1 point. And so there are two places where he really shines. Number one is when you're first getting out and you have limited deck points. And number two is in the late game where you have really powerful cards and actually your best deck is just cramming your best possible Servants cards into that deck. So with that 16 points, you get a ton of deck points to play with, which makes him actually very appealing if you have just very high level cards and want to walk over someone. To talk about his ability real quick, when one of your Servants of the Emperor cards is destroyed, one of your cards readies at 225%. So it's a double ready of a random one of your cards still surviving when one of your cards dies. And since Servants is full of cheaper cards with several of the best endless cards in the game and some cheap taunts, it's pretty easy to trigger that. Which again is really good for newer players, and one of the best things about Yarrick, and like most of the Servants Warlords and a lot of the Eldar Warlords, is that you get a benefit for your cards dying. So even if you're on the back foot, it can actually help you come back and win that game, which again is really good for players starting out. Very good for those close games where you're almost at parity with your opponent, but then also really good late game where you're losing some key cards, and then you can just have it be kind of a bonus rather than something that you rely on. And that's both one of the biggest things about Yarrick and one of the traps is you don't want to just fill your deck with chaff cards. So you don't want all just endless cards. Your board is full of cards that die, but then that ready benefit isn't actually very good. So you want to pick a theme, if it's going to be melee or ranged, and then you want to pick cards that have that ready value, whether that's ranged or ranged, melee. And that's actually something too. So the card itself will ready for whatever it's going to ready for. And it's also random of which of your cards is alive. And you've got to remember that if an endless card dies, the first copy, the second copy will come back into play before that ready actually triggers. So say you want a ranged debuff, and one of these guys dies, and he comes back and does the Yarrick trigger and readies for ranged buff. So that's something you want to build around. You can benefit from pretty much any of the buffs, especially if you have a really, really strong deck. The buffs are just kind of gravy. But if you want to fine-tune a deck and really build around it, I opt for ranged. Let's actually build this. So we'll choose Yarrick. Clicking the wrong button here. Oops. Yeah, there we go, okay. So we'll go ahead and choose Yarrick here. And then this is the last deck I built with Yarrick. It's ranged heavy. It's got a mix of your endless and taunt cards, but not a ton of them. But then all of the other cards are just a reasonable combination of ranged hitting power, points cost, and durability. You want them to stay on the board a little bit and stand on their own feet a bit and not just be waiting for Yarrick's buffs. And they also, if you have a bonus shot, like precision shot or furious charge that does the attack on drop, that will not spend Yarrick's bonus, so you can use that to deal damage on the board, but then do a ready so you're not taking any damage back. So say you have a turn of doing Psychic because you don't have lethal damage on the opponent's cards, you can still inflict some damage while you're waiting for the opportune moment to strike. You also want a little barrage in here, which is really handy, and I've actually got two. I've got him because he's at a very convenient point cost, and then of course this sucker here to really lay on the hurt there. They're also in theme. It's a very Imperial Guard heavy, Cadian heavy list. He is Cadian, right? Let's see. It doesn't say. I don't honestly remember. I know he's the hero of Armageddon. I'm pretty sure he's mostly Cadian, but I'm not sure. Might be Mordian from the Garb. My bad. Anyway, so we're just going to go ahead and play this real quick, and then I'm going to talk about what's in it, why I chose those cards again, and then look at some other alternative options. Another sort of note about Yarrick, you should be able to tell from his stats, but he himself is a card you don't want on the board unless you're already ahead or you have the kill shot there, because he's real squishy and doesn't hit very hard himself. He does have Inspire, which can help you push through those last couple turns, which is not bad. So that's definitely something to watch for, but you do want to be careful. Oh, okay. Wow, all right. That is a rough start, so we're going to just build up those buffs, because I want to hit this thing as hard and as fast as I can when I get there, and I already positioned my Hellhound poorly. So I shouldn't have played the Hellhound first. I should have waited until I saw more of his cards available, because that is pretty gnarly. The good news, though, is the Hellhound is the least of my heavy hitters, so it's not the worst thing in the world, and he's already played his Taunt, but I also don't want to hit that. I don't want to shoot him until I can really put some damage into this Dreadnought, because you don't want to plink it. You want to take it down in one swoop, which is one of the things that Yarrick is best at. So he's very, very good against decks that rely on Berserk, just because he himself is very good at building up Haymaker punches. And so these guys, what's great about it is I'm going to be able to wipe these guys all together, hopefully. We'll go ahead and try for that. Let's see, who does the most single target damage? We got 89 and we've got 84. So it's about the same. If I had my Lehman Russ, I would have put that in the middle to guarantee I take out this middle guy. Yeah, sweet. So there, I'm talking about those Haymaker punches. There are very few decks that have the single shot damage that's higher than Yarrick, because of the cards you can cram in there and because of all those free readies you're getting. Quote unquote free. You shouldn't call it free because you are losing cards to do it. But yeah, and I was a little concerned about this deck, but it's a full deck that had several expensive cards right out of the gate, so I should be able to mop this up fairly easily now that we're here. And you can see that ready builds up very, very quickly. Here, though, it can be a little bit tricky because you don't want to waste, quote-unquote, waste your heavy hits and not have them when something really nasty comes out. So I'm a little concerned about Helbrecht himself. Let's check his level. Level 7. Yeah, he's a pretty nasty customer. We should be okay here, especially with Taunt, but both my Endless cards are gone, so my defenses are a little thin at this point, so I do need to be careful. But that's something to look for in play. Like, again, I didn't overfill this with chaff and then had a pretty rough opening deployment, so I should be just fine here. But it still was a little rockier than I'd like, and that's something to keep in mind when I'm kind of rebuilding this. I still have 3 cards in deck, so I just have to get to Helbrecht himself. Scariest thing here is going to be that guy. Of course, that Inspire is going to be replaced by Helbrecht when he comes on the board, but should be able to take down him, yeah, and the wolf. And then, assuming Helbrecht can't one-shot my tank, I should have a pretty easy close here. Yeah, no problem. Sweet. He's got no hesitation on punching me in melee, though, because I have no melee return fire to speak of. So I take a beating there, but then should comfortably take him down. And again, in this final turn, and several of these turns, I was a little overpowered here, so I didn't need the bonus from Helbrecht, so that's something to keep in mind. Is that going to be enough? No, sweet. Yeah, no problem. And he'll kill that, and then this is going to be one of those silly cases where I think I'm actually going to have Helbrecht himself do, or Yarrick himself do the finishing hit here. Bloop. If this, I actually have enough of a melee charge up that, yeah, the assassin's got it. All right, sniper, punchy sniper. Anyway, so that was a game. You can kind of see how it goes, and that was against a pretty hard-hitting melee specialist deck, too. So that was a good example of kind of a bad matchup. Of course, a Badruk would be a bad matchup because it will get those bonus attacks and kind of give you some trouble, but that was a pretty solid example of a Yarrick game and a Yarrick deck doing what it's supposed to do, coming out on top. I didn't have to put Yarrick on the board in the end, which is nice. That's a pretty good indication that you're at a decent power level and have built the deck in a way that is going to be very effective. Because if Yarrick hits the board too soon and you start losing games, that's when you need to take it back to the drawing board or dial it, tune it up a little bit tighter. So taking another look at the ways you can build this again is fairly standard. You've got your Lehman Russ, you've got your Barrage cards, you've got your Hellhound, you've got your Taunt, you've got your Endless, and you've got a target acquired. These two could be combined or split in a number of different ways, but this is a decent core to start with. All of these cards also are pretty decent at fairly low level, so if you're just starting out, this is not a bad starting point, and these will level quickly and kind of help you get there. Also a key thing to note that only one of these is epic, which means they will level up more quickly, except Yarrick himself, And then the majority of them are actually common. So when you get a couple copies of these, you'll see them level fairly quickly and get you up to speed. Yarrick was one of my first very effective warlords early on, and that still holds true even as the game has kind of evolved since then. But now we've talked about ranged. You can do a Yarrick deck that's heavy melee, and Yarrick himself actually hits a lot harder in melee than he does in ranged, which works out because as you're using your ranged attacks, he's building up a little bit of a melee charge that you can use as well. You can also do kind of a fusion, but anytime you dilute that, so where your readies are split between melee and ranged, that can really hurt your overall effectiveness of the deck, because you won't necessarily have the charge ups you need when you need them, and it'll reduce the benefit you're getting because they're all sort of building in different directions. Not to say it can't work, but it's just something to watch out for. If you're struggling with ranged mirror matches where you're getting outshot, something like the Medicae, the 4-cost Medicae is a great piece, because she will trigger Yarrick's ability, she'll keep your guns on the board longer, and if she is the target of Yarrick's random trait trigger, she will do that range debuff to help reduce your incoming shooting. So that's not a bad thing to consider. But what you're really looking for is the greens that match the kind of deck you're doing. So you can do an all-psyker deck with Yarrick, and the same thing will apply, where if you're shot or hit with melee, it will still charge up your follow-up psychic attacks. And servants do have some pretty nasty psychic cards. In this guy here, and then if you've got it, you got this guy, which if he's high enough level, which I just got, I'm very excited about, does the area effect. They can be really devastating pieces, and you can make a pretty nasty Psyker deck with Yarrick. And it's one of the rare cases where you'll be able to include all of your Psykers in your deck because Yarrick himself is so cheap. The other option is to do a melee deck, where servants have some incredibly hard-hitting melee cards. You've got a lot of durable ones with the shields on the custodians, and then just some incredibly punchy cards that really benefit from that melee buff. And one of the cool things there is, again, you can just jam-pack this deck, and you don't even need to include any chaff cards, and just have it like when one of them dies, then you get his benefit, but you mostly use it as gravy, rather than having it be like a staple of the deck, as this one is. So that's an important thing to think of. He's one of those characters where you do lose something every time you use his ability. It can be a nice bonus when you're losing cards anyway, but you don't want to lean into it too hard, or you'll find your deck is too thin and it's dying too quickly, and you can't take advantage of that buff. So that's it. Backpedal just a little bit. I don't consider Yarrick one of the stronger Servants Warlords, at least not for me personally. He's really good for starting out. He's really good for the mid-game. You will find that he falls a little bit behind some of the others like Greyfax, and especially Canoness at the upper levels, and at the very, very top. Canoness is going to outperform him dramatically, and Greyfax will show up, and then Vol is just a monster of durability. So those are kind of your tougher Servants cards, but if you want to use Yarrick, if you like the theme of him, if you enjoy the builds with him, he's a really fun and flexible warlord that can be used for pretty much any attack type you'd like. That's it. I hope that was helpful with Yarrick. I'm going to do another one of these shortly for Zemat, so look for that to pop soon, and holler if you have any questions or any requests yourself. Cheers.